you mentioned the case of Charlie Kirk, and with the latest, gathering TPUSA, you see two forces confronting each other. One of them is Tucker Carlson, together with, even Steve Bannon, and on the other hand, you see Ben Shapiro and his people, and somewhere in the middle, you see Megyn Kelly trying to, be on both sides, which wasn't possible. After all, Ben Shapiro, said that you cannot do this. You are with us or against us. But when you look at the TPUSA and the questions that these young people are asking, and those to Tucker Carlson, even Ben Shapiro, do you think that the sort of movement, the sort of feeling that was created in at TPUSA is somehow fading away, or you see even with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, there are people, young people, asking about what is the benefit of the United States supporting Israel, or
Well,
even what
yeah.
is the benefit of these endless wars.
What I mean, what question do you want me to focus on, the split, or whether there is
Yeah,
more anti-war sentiment within the conservative
yeah.
base?
The split. I want to talk about this split because that's important to understand the behavior of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, the split is not just about Israel. Israel is one of the major issues that is splitting conservatives, and it's a generational split. You know, look at the relationship between Nikki Haley, who was Trump's UN ambassador, former South Carolina governor, total neocon who wanted to be president and was rejected by the Republican base. Supports her message to Israel during the Gaza genocide was finish them, and she signed Israeli howitzers that were going to be fired into civilian neighborhoods in Gaza. Her son is sort of Groyper-centric, America first, opposes the U.S. special relationship with Israel, and wants to sort of be a voice for his generation. So in many ways, it's a generational split. And that means young people just tend to be more anti-war in general in the U.S. because where have any of these wars gotten them? What have they delivered? Their status is declining. The living standards in the U.S. are declining, and yet the U.S. military budget continues to go up. So they're connecting the dots. At TPUSA, when Ben Shapiro delivered his 20-minute speech, which was mainly an attack on Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, he was speaking for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance to some extent. I mean, it was also an attack on Nick Fuentes. And so he was attacking Fuentes on behalf of J.D. Vance because Fuentes had called Vance's Hindu wife Ajit, which is basically like calling her the N-word, and is just constantly taunting J.D. Vance. And J.D. Vance can't really respond without in a credible way. So Ben Shapiro was positioning himself as sort of the voice of the MAGA establishment. And he's also the voice of the donor class that is animating Trump's behavior when he meets with Benjamin Netanyahu and promises him the whole store and basically promises to attack Iran. So whether Ben Shapiro is popular or not, and he's lost a lot of popularity, you look at his numbers on his podcast, they're declining. He's still speaking on behalf of some very powerful forces. And it really shows you how little credibility Donald Trump's America First brand has left, because you have a figure like Ben Shapiro, who was a never Trumper early on in the first Trump term, who left the outlet Breitbart because they were pro-Trump. And now he's the standard bearer of the Trumpist establishment. And then you have figures like Tucker Carlson, who was one of the first avatars of the America First brand, who spoke at the Republican convention in 2024, who is who was always very close to Trump and is close friends with JD Vance. And while he spoke at AmFest for TPUSA, he's not really welcome in the White House anymore. And in many ways, he's kind of seen it as an enemy because he's criticized Trump on Israel, on the war on Iran, on so many issues where the base feels betrayed. And then there's Candace Owens, who is, I think, in the thickets and weeds of the various theories around Charlie Kirk's death, and they're being used to the extent that she's unable to provide evidence. They're being used to discredit her by figures like Ben Shapiro. And then Nick Fuentes is kind of off on his own, attacking everybody. He had this sort of so-called generational run, which seemed to be very coordinated and sequenced through all of the top right-wing podcasts. He sat down with Tucker. He sat down with Candace. He sat down with Dave Smith. He sat down with Red Scare. It was like one after another. It felt like there was some powerful force propelling him through this so-called generational run. And then after it all, he's attacking Candace Owens, questioning why she's in England on a pheasant hunt. He's attacking Tucker Carlson again after they supposedly made nice. And he's mocking the hell out of JD Vance. And so he's sort of this chaos agent that might not even lead people to vote for JD Vance. And then what is TPUSA? After Charlie Kirk was assassinated, it is essentially a gigantic grift for the remaining principals, his lieutenants, who remain mostly unknown to the American public, who can't match his charisma and don't have his political acumen. And the only one that's recognizable to the public is Erica Kirk, who gleefully replaced her husband and is now the object of, I think, very justified mockery on Twitter. You look at all these memes, like a normal widow grieving the loss of their husband is like, disappears from society for months. And then Erica Kirk, and they'll show like 60-year-old Madonna like working a pole on stage, or a woman shooting fireworks out of her butt. Like, those are the memes mocking Erica Kirk. And what was Erica Kirk doing on stage at TPUSA? She was having like a friendly sit down with Nicki Minaj, one of the trashiest figures to emerge from the world of corporate rap, who is now basically, it looks like some Trump crony billionaire bought her. And she's on stage making the case for Trump's military assault on Nigeria, which is obviously a play to plunder Nigeria's oil and mineral wealth. And Erica Kirk's right there. And, I've said this on our live stream last week at the Gray Zone, that if somebody blew my head off, like a Ukrainian Nazi blew my head off, or some Zionist maniac shot me during a public event, my wife, Anya, she wouldn't be doing a sit-down event with a trashy rapper just a few months later with pyrotechnic displays. I can be sure of that. She wouldn't even be doing a sit-down with a crappy SoundCloud rapper. It just wouldn't be happening. So this is not a normal person. This is a deeply narcissistic, disturbed individual, and it raises a lot of questions about the marriage to begin with. But it's turning off masses of people, and TPUSA is supposed to really be the base of the get out the vote operation for someone like JD Vance, who is supposed to be a shoo-in for the nomination. But JD Vance isn't a shoo-in because he's considered too close to Tucker Carlson, and the Jewish supremacist wing of the Trump movement actually dislikes JD Vance, and he's not kowtowing enough to them. So I think they've set the stage for their own electoral ruin, starting with the midterms, and that whoever assassinated Charlie Kirk, let's assume it was Tyler Robinson. Let's assume it was possibly a trans furry who thought that Charlie Kirk was an anti-trans bigot. They actually removed one of the most effective figures from the right, and the right is now in total disarray. It's almost like the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, where it just totally destroyed the peace camp in Israel. An assassination, by the way, which Netanyahu was accused of encouraging by Rabin's widow. Remember, Netanyahu had to twice denounce theories that he was responsible for killing Charlie Kirk. So he always has some kind of adjacency to historic assassinations. But this was a powerful blow to the right, and it exposed all the underlying divisions.
Max, Netanyahu is trying to get closer to South Cyprus and to Greece as well.
Yeah.
And do you think that is some sort of movement on his part to counter Turkey? Because the northern part of Cyprus is under the control of Turkey, the southern part is under the control of Greece. And what else can he do? Because I don't see that much of importance in the type of movement he's doing. But what is the end game in Cyprus and Greece?
That's just it. Israel's placed numerous listening stations used by its Unit 8200, its version of the NSA, in and around Greek territory. Its arms sales to Greece are proceeding at a record rate. It's doing flyovers in Greek territory. I mean, the Greek government is essentially, which is a pro-NATO government, like a very pro-NATO government, is almost openly siding with Israel in its conflict with Turkey. And then you have Cyprus, which is being colonized by Israelis, by mostly wealthy Israelis. And the colonization becomes a vehicle for Israeli intelligence infiltration. They're buying lots and lots of land in Cyprus. Israel's setting up community centers. And it's doing so with local opposition, but without government opposition. Again, it's going to be a base for countering Turkey in the Mediterranean. And then you have Syria, where Israel is determined that Turkey not gain a foothold in Syria. And so it's attacking the Syrian government constantly, something that actually pits it against Trump. And Trump appears to have made some agreement with MBS during their meeting in exchange for all of this sort of bribery money to defend the government of Ahmed al-Sharaa in Syria. And what Saudi Arabia wants is a major foothold in Syria, investments in infrastructure, investments in oil infrastructure. And Trump is singing their tune, and Israel's pushing back. So Israel's trying to establish a miniature imperium that extends from the Mediterranean all the way to the Bab el-Mandeb and Red Sea, where it has recognized Somaliland and becomes, I think, the first country to formally recognize Somaliland, whereas over 30 countries have recognized a Palestinian state. So they're seeking access to physical, access to countries stretching across the entire region. And they're going to use that access for military basing, for listening centers, for overflight, and to become a regional hegemon, which can then push back potentially on the U.S. at that point if the U.S. seeks to get its attack dog back on a leash. Netanyahu has announced his plan for a $100 billion domestic military production program to produce platforms. The United States in the past has forbidden Israel from producing its own domestic attack jet because it wants to profit from the sale of F-15s and F-18s and the F-35 now. That's money that goes back into the executives of Lockheed Martin and other producers of these high-tech platforms. But now Netanyahu's basically flouting the U.S. and saying, you're going to continue to give us aid? and we're going to develop our domestic program. The United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, they have trillions of dollars to play with, but the United States would never allow them to do this and simultaneously protect their oil wells. So Israel is just gone. It's so clear that Israel is not acting on behalf of the U.S. and is willing to contravene U.S. interests in its bid to establish itself as a regional hegemon. And, some might argue global hegemon.
Yeah. Donald Trump came to power in January 2025 with two major conflicts and one potential conflict in Ukraine, in the Middle East, the case of Israel and Gaza, and the potential conflict with Taiwan. And today, at the end of 2025, we have a new conflict in Latin America against Venezuela. And he's looking at the numbers. He's not reducing the conflicts, he's increasing the number of conflicts. And how important is Venezuela today for Donald Trump?
Yeah, he's increasing the number of conflicts and increasing the pace of U.S. attacks on countries that were already under attack by the U.S. Somalia, for example. Record numbers of U.S. airstrikes on Somalia as Trump calls for the removal of all Somali people from the United States, including U.S. citizens. Venezuela is this intricate, multi-layered conflict in which Trump was drawn in first through his obsession with the mass removal of Venezuelans who mostly entered the United States legally through the TPS program. And in order to end the TPS program, Trump had to invoke, this is like the reasoning of his Joseph Goebbels, Stephen Miller, who's sort of his brain and the voice of the whole deportation policy and border policy, was that Trump had to announce or legally justify the United States somehow being at war with Venezuela to invoke the 1798 Alien Enemies Act. And if the U.S. was at war with Venezuela, all of those Venezuelan migrants would be considered enemies who had to be removed, and that's how he could end the TPS program and legally remove them all. That's what the United States did to British citizens in its borders in 1798. And so Stephen Miller came to Trump and said, let's just do a war with Venezuela, and then we can do that. And Trump said, great. Marco Rubio, Trump's Secretary of State, National Security Council Director, wants to attack Venezuela for ideological reasons. It will destroy the economic engine of the Latin American left and deprive Cuba of energy. Then in Marco Rubio's mind, Cuba will start to collapse because the population just simply won't be able to have an electricity grid anymore. There'll be no more oil, leaving out the fact that Mexico is exporting a lot of oil to Cuba. That's the thinking. And this whole operation, which Pete Hegseth was eager to join after the Signalgate fiasco to demonstrate success and loyalty to the mission, was called Operation Southern Spear. It began with this phony anti-drug operations in which small fishing boats were attacked by Navy SEAL teams, drones, killing all men on board, including in double tap strikes. It was obviously a fraud. There was obviously no anti-drug trafficking value to these strikes. But the point, according to White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles in a very revealing interview with Vanity Fair, was to keep hitting these boats until Maduro cries uncle. Well, they kept hitting the boats. Maduro didn't cry uncle. It actually caused a scandal in Washington because video circulated of the double tap strike, horrifying many senators and members of Congress. Hegseth has refused to release the video. Maduro stays in through November, and they start moving the strikes to the Eastern Pacific, where actual drug trafficking is taking place. Venezuela isn't really the main origin point of drugs to the United States. And I did a little analysis myself yesterday of when the last strike off Venezuela's shores took place. It was actually November 20th, over a month ago, meaning the first phase of Operation Southern Spear has completely run its course, and they've given up on the entire anti-drug justification for pressuring Venezuela. And now they've moved on to seizing Venezuelan oil tankers. Trump announced a quarantine of Venezuelan oil tankers to strangle Venezuela's economy. They seized 2 oil tankers. There's another one called the Bella 1, which is sailing north in the Atlantic right now, and the Coast Guard has failed to board it after attempting to. The crew has refused to allow them to board. They've painted a Russian flag on the side of the vessel and declared that they belong to Russia. And it looks like the Coast Guard will actually fail to board Bella 1, which is an amazing episode of military blundering and failure. PDVSA, the main oil company of Venezuela, is not changing any of its scheduling for oil exports, for offloading oil. Oil tankers continue to leave Venezuela, as Reuters reported yesterday. And meanwhile, you have 10% of the U.S. Navy deployed off Venezuela's coast, with more special forces coming to the fore. What are they doing there? How long can this continue? What is the point? Where is this going? Nobody knows. The American public is solidly against it. The Venezuelan public is against it, regardless of their views on Maduro. And Trump has no clear exit strategy without losing face. And the U.S. media, it's starting to dawn on them that actually Maduro isn't going to leave. So what happens next? This is the question, I think, because everyone is talking about Trump's errant and rambling comments, first on a radio show and then during his meeting with Netanyahu, about the U.S. sort of secretly striking a port that he called an offloading center for drugs in Venezuela. And it looked like he was actually referring to a fire at a livestock supply plant in Maracaibo called Primasol. It looks like he might be making it up. But the question that I have is he actually saying the U.S. struck Venezuela to give himself a way out? The same way that he provided himself and Israel with a way out of the 12-day war with Iran by launching Operation Midnight Hammer, where the B-2 bomber basically attacked Fordo, failed to destroy the uranium stockpiles, but at least gave Trump justification to say, all right, that's enough, everybody stop fighting. Is this Trump's attempt to kind of dislodge himself from a situation where he's losing face, where scandals are erupting every week, and where they can't even stop a slow-moving oil tanker? I think we'll know the answer to that early in the new year.